Welcome to part 2 of my Chapter 9 lecture on arrays in VB.NET, or if you prefer, CIS 212. What I have here is a little program. Now we're getting into the syntax. The first part was more conceptual to explain to you what elements are and what indices are and ordinal positions and all that mess. And it's really just one block of memory that you step through, and it's, as we spoke about in the first video, it stores the same data type, so you know if it's an array of integers, each block of memory that's contiguous or back to back is typically 4 bytes, and that's how it can calculate where it needs to be. And when you give it an index to get at a certain location or a certain element, that's how it does it. It uses that number and multiplies it by the size of the data type, and it reaches the memory location, and then you have access to that, just like in a regular array. A little bit more complicated, but not terribly so. So here I have an array called R, and notice that I don't have the number of elements in here. I don't have to do that. I could just leave that blank if I'm going to go ahead and initialize it when I declare it, which I always like for you to do. And in this case, I'm just doing, it's of type string, as you can see here. I'm doing 5, 10, 15, and 20. So there are how many elements? 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's, if I would, tell it to do that, I could, but it's redundant in this case because it knows. And notice that when you initialize an array, a single dimensional array, you have opening and closing curly braces, and each element is separated by a comma. Now these are string literal, so I have to have the quotes in there. If it were an array of integers, it would just be 5, 10, 15, and 20. There wouldn't be any quotes. They would still, however, be separated by commas. This is my output string. The string object, it's an object, so it has properties and methods, and if you use the dot operator at the end of a valid object name, you get IntelliSense. It shows you everything that's available to you from that class. So I'm going to use empty. That just empties it out, so I don't have to worry about garbage being in there. Now this is my loop counter, and remember that in Visual Basic, this is a for next loop. It has to end with next and start with for. This is your start value. This is your end value. And this is optional if you're going to be increasing it or incrementing it by 1. I just put it in there because I'm used to doing it, but that is optional. If you want to do anything other than 1, like -1 or 2.7 or 5 or whatever, then you have to tell it the step value. Now what's going on in here is string output plus equals. So what I'm doing is I'm going to build the string output dynamically based on the contents of each element in the array, which is I is going to traverse. It's going to go to element 0, index 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, or 3, 0, 1, 2, and 3. And it's going to grab the value. See, that's how you get to the value. I is going to vary from 0 to 3. And I'm just sticking, using the concatenation operator, which you did in the string parsing part of the course, a space. And when I get out, I'm just going to pop up a message box and show everybody the contents of the array. And that's all we're doing. We're just traversing the array. That's all we're doing here. We're not doing anything with it. We will in the next example. So let's run it and press F5. And there's my little GUI. This has to do with the second example, but I just have a button here. It's going to pop up. So let's loop step through this real quick. So it broke. I have added R in here, but it's has a nothing value because this has initialization has not happened yet. All right, so now look, I have a little expandable arrow. It says length equals 4. Length is a property of this array. If I expand this, you'll see 0, 1, 2, and 3. What are these? These are the indices. They always start at 0 and end at 1 less than the number of elements. How many elements are here? 1, 2, 3, 4. See that? Length equals 4. So at index 0, or element 1, if you will, I don't want to confuse you. I'm going to use indices, but this is the first, second, third, and fourth element. And remember that the highest index is always 1 less. That's the off by 1 error they talk about in the book. At index 0, we have a string 5. At index 1, we have a string 10. At index 2, we have 15. At index 3, we have 20. And if you look up here, that's exactly what I initialized these to. Okay. Let me put my output string in here so we can take a look at it. All right, so it's about to be initialized as we step through the code with F10 to empty. As you can see, it's got an opening closing quote with nothing in between them, no space or anything. I is going to be initialized to 0. That's my counter. That's my loop control variable. I could have not initialized it because it initializes in the loop, but I wanted to do it that way. So F10. Now what are we doing here? We're starting at 0 because that's always the first element. The 0th index is the first element, represents the first element. So always start at 0. And then we go to r.length minus 1. Why am I doing length minus 1? Because length gives you the number of elements, which is always one more than the highest index. Okay? So I'm really going from 0 to 3 because length is what? 4. And I'm incrementing the counter I by what? 1, according to the step value here. All right? So I'm going to step on through here and let's see what happens. Let me collapse that to our string. It put a 5 in the space. At 10, it's just building the string dynamically. And now it's going to blow out of that loop because we hit one less than the number of elements, which was 3. And now it's going to output that in a message box. And there it is, 5 space 10 space 15 space 20. Now that's pretty simple. And actually two-dimensional arrays aren't any worse either.